This is episode 71 of the Sports Business Classroom audio experience. Today's guest is the absolutely brilliant Eric Pincus. Eric is a media personality, basketball strategist, and an NBA collective bargaining agreement expert who serves as a national writer for Bleacher Report. He is also a host and instructor for Sports Business Classroom. If you are someone who is interested in the business of basketball and becoming a media personality in this business, you're going to absolutely love this episode. Eric has had an incredible array of experience in the business of basketball, including getting to know Kobe Bryant, and is a respected thought leader that has covered the game of basketball for the LA Times, NBA TV, and Bleacher Report. In this episode, you will learn what it's like to leave a successful career to work in basketball, what it takes to be an NBA media personality, and advice for young people who want to make it in this business. Ladies and gentlemen, I can't overstate how much respect I have for the knowledge that Eric has about the business of basketball. He is truly someone who has put in the time to become an expert, and I am so excited for you to get to know him. Without further ado, I give you Eric Pincus. Well, Eric, welcome to Sports Business Classroom. It's great to have you on the show.
Happy to be here.
Usually you are one of the instructors. Today you are the subject, okay. And I really appreciate you making the time. You are a salary cap strategist, a capologist, a writer, and instructor, and we're going to get into all that, what that means, what that looks like in your day-to-day life. But before we get there, give us a little bit of background about kind of where you grew up, what your childhood was like, and where you went to college.
You have like a couch or something I could like tell all my
I want to hear it all.
History.
I want to hear it all.
I mean, I was born in New York. I came out here in second grade. And I was a baseball guy growing up. New York Mets was my thing.
Okay.
But at some point in the 90s, around the Nick Van Exel era of Los Angeles, that's when I always loved basketball, but that's when it kind of like, I wanted to be there all the time. And
why is that? Do you know why?
No, there's something wrong with me. Just like, it is what it is. Like, you fall in love with what you fall in love with, right? Sure. You can't control that. I love the game of basketball. I love football. Playing it, never really watched it that much. Loved playing it. I was always better at football. I'm better horizontally as an athlete, or at least in my prime. I was never a very vertical, athlete. Basketball is more of a vertical game. Love playing baseball. Love watching baseball. But at some point, something about the game clicked. I went to like, I would get the Clippers 10-game package. Okay. So I'd see Michael play. It seemed like Barkley was always hurt when he played the Clippers on the road. So he just would like skip the Clippers game. But like I got to see the Lakers play twice. That was kind of that era. And then I would go to as many games as I could at the Forum and just sort of fell in love with the game and was doing other things. I grew up working in an event planning company with my family, which is really my background in accounting, in software, in all kinds of other aspects, production. I did a bit of everything. When you own your own business, you sort of have to just do everything.
Sure.
And so I have a lot of life experience, but along the way, I realized like watching these games and paying money to go to those games, that there was actually like a job where you get money to go to games. And I'm like, okay, well, let's try it. Let's see how to make that happen. And it was sort of like something I did as just passionate. I don't know, like I said, something might be wrong with me, whatever. I would write in the early days of the internet and publish on really what were message boards at the time. So we're talking the early 2000s.
Okay.
And I got an opportunity to work with something called Hoopsworld, a website that is defunct. Mm-hmm. It was Steve Kyler, who is someone I've been friends with a long time. They hired me. I worked with him for like 5 years before I finally met him. And when I say hired, it's kind of a stretch because there was no money. At some point we did get I remember there was a point we got like maybe $30 a month because I was writing for Chauncey Billups' site. I was writing for Al Harrington's site. I'd have to think who else, but like players started to get their own websites. There was no Twitter. Right. There was no Facebook. There was barely even blogs at that point. And everyone was it was sort of this Wild West type situation where it was just an unknown. And I carved out a little niche. Built up a reputation, actually started to get good. And what was good about Hoopsworld is that they had a relationship with the teams. Mm-hmm. And the Lakers didn't know who I was, they didn't know much about the internet, but the Clippers needed coverage, and they were more eager to get that, and they let me in. And then I got to go to away games. Let's see, it would be a Lakers away game, Clippers home game, and that's when I sort of got to know John Black, who ran the Lakers PR at that point. And the Lakers at some point were like, okay, you're a professional human being. I knew how to carry myself, and eventually started, covering the games, and got a job at the LA Times, and now Bleacher Report, and hooked up.
And so on and so forth.
2016 with Larry Coon and I became friends many, many years ago. And when he was brought on to work with SBC, I came with Larry, and I've been around ever since. So that's kind of the big points of how I got to where I am. Right.
That's the origin story.
Yeah.
At what age were you when you started participating in the forums?
So I got a late start for what is really my second career. And so we're talking, I'd have to think about the exact year, but just around 30.
Wow.
30, yeah. So if you're listening and you're like, oh, it's too late for me to do this, that, or the other thing. I mean, I've been doing this for about 20 years, so I'm kind of aging myself.
My math's not so good,
but it keeps me young, because to me, this is, if you're doing what you love, I think it makes it's work. And there are times where I would like to sleep and I got to finish what I'm doing. And there are times I'm writing on topics I'm not as partial to, or you're struggling. The point is, it's not 24/7 party, but by and large, I'm doing something I enjoy. So it makes those challenges a lot easier to push through.
So you were 30 and you had a prior career.
Right.
Talk about that a little bit. What were you doing? Give us a brief synopsis of what you were doing, and what made you make the jump.
This change, really, I stopped working in the family business a year before the shutdown, the COVID shutdown. So 2018, 2019, probably 2019 is when I officially stopped working.
Okay.
So, my parents came to LA they drove us out to LA as a duo, guitar, singing, they're musicians, and moved us to LA, and they would play weddings and things like that. And so I would go to bar mitzvahs and they would be the band. Literally, that's not that happened. That was my life. That was just normal for me. And they realized that as they had success, they would have opportunities to do more than one party, but you can't be in two places at once. So then they started to hire other bands and started to cultivate. So eventually we ended up with 7 regular working bands every weekend, almost every weekend. Weddings, every birthdays, anniversary, any corporate parties. Corporate was huge. And so, and then we realized we were good at what we did. And so we expanded that into party planning and props. And we ended up with 2 warehouses. One was 17,000 square feet. Another one was about 25,000 square foot of props. And we had this pretty large business. I did all the books. I wrote all the software for the business to operate. I did, obviously, I DJ'd, so I was at parties, at weddings. I've done more weddings than you could even guess, thousands of.
Did you MC them too?
Oh, I just did one, got about a month and a half ago, which I'm retired from that, but it was a former employee, and she had booked the wedding before I left. It was pre-COVID, and it was on the books, and they postponed it twice. And so, this is a friend, and I'm like, all right, I still got to do it. And it was a blast, and I didn't miss a beat. It was it was like breathing. I know how to do that stuff exceptionally well.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, I have a lot of life experience that helps me in what I do.
Yeah.
Helps me in understanding strategy, business strategy. People ask me how how you evaluate picks and trades, and some of it comes from life experience of negotiating leases for that was really what my mother did, and she's retired, but she was the negotiator, and a tough negotiator. I mean, seriously, unreasonable negotiator. You did not want to negotiate against her because her starting was ridiculous, but
she knew how to play the game.
Yeah, and so I've learned some of that strategy from her, whereas my father's more of a salesman, and I've learned some of that as well. I'm not a salesperson, but when you write, there's some aspect of communication that carries forward. So I have some of those things in my DNA, I guess, or my back
toolbox.
Pocket. Right.
Yeah.
But at some point, so I would literally work all day and weekends, And then I would go to games and I'd work the games and then I'd write. And so there was long stretches of not a lot of sleep. And then I started to have kids with my wife. It was around the time. So it was the compromise of what it all made it all work was that I agreed not to travel as my career grew, that I could do a beat. So I ended up doing the beat for the LA Times, but I didn't do the travel. So I worked with Mike Bresnahan, who's now on Spectrum, right? So he was the traveling beat. I was everything local and supported him while he was on the road and always sort of like an intel hub. So as long as I didn't travel, now I can, as my kids are older now, I can travel, no problem. But that was sort of the way to make it all work. So I was working 2 jobs because, and this is the reality of the sports industry, is that as you get started, it is hard to make money initially. You can get there, but it's not necessarily, you're doing something you love. That's the pro, and the perks are great, but sometimes the money isn't there right away. So like I was saying, when I first started, if I got $30 in a month, you can't live off of $30 in a month, right? It doesn't matter who you are. It's like, so I, gradually things started to even where I was now, working professionally, and the time had come for me to. My parents were retiring, and my siblings took over, and we sort of used that as the opportunity for me to transition out to full time do what I've been able to do. So I can't complain about my road. So
well, congratulations.
Thank you.
I mean, that's quite the story. So 18 years, roughly? 18 years before you decided to go full time?
Right. So let's see. Well, I mean, I started doing stuff around 2001. I didn't really start working. Like my first interview was with Chris Kaman his rookie year. So that's the year LeBron came in. My career in person started it started before that. Like I'd been to summer leagues. At the Pyramid. Yeah, at the Pyramid, the Long Beach, which is where I met Larry Coon. That's where I met Mitch Kupchak and Byron Scott and started, Sasha Vujicic and all the guys who were coming in, Kareem Rush, Howard Beck, writers, Brad Turner, guys who covered the league, and then people who played in the league, and then people, executives and whatnot. And that's where I saw like there's a lot more to this game than just the players.
Right.
And that's really kind of, I'm very observant and hungry for how things work. Understanding how things work is something that is interesting to me. I'm in this great facility and I'm looking at all the, I'm like fascinated by like, okay, how's the studio work? Because it's just how my mind works. In the case of basketball, you have a 48-minute game between the lines. And as I started to get more involved, I realized there's a 365 full year battle between 30 different organizations, plus the league, plus all the agents who represent the players. Right. And then you have the networks who have their own agendas and set, the schedule is very much determined by the networks because they have games that they want. They have stars that they want. And so that's going to determine who plays where and when. So there's so many different competing. Then you have the shoe companies. Like as I dug deeper, I'm like, I mean, this is more than just some young guys playing in between some lines for 48 minutes. There's a lot more to it. And I sort of became more of maybe a specialist in that aspect of the league. How does the league work from, in my case, like a salary cap point of view, a strategy point of view, a team building point of view?
At what point did you decide to actually focus on that part rather than what was going on between the lines, right? Because deciding to focus on the CBA, the business side, and really understand all of the workings of the game is very different from, let's say, for example, what scouts do, right?
Well, I would say it's more of like a supply and demand analysis, right? Like I understand this and not many people do, and I can communicate it in a way that not many people can. Not to say that others can't, but I was able to communicate to an audience. I was getting the kind of response from the audience that was receptive, that was hungry for more knowledge. I mean, I used to listen to radio shows and I'd be like, oh, no, they can't do that. And they're doing a whole segment about like, they should do this. I'm like, and I'd call the line and then I'd get on.
You were that guy.
And I try, and like you have to wait on hold. And then I got to a point where like, now I know the producers of that show. So I just text them and I say, your guy is like off the rails. That's not even possible. He's like, I don't care. Let him, the segment's over in 15 minutes. Everyone's going to forget about this as soon as it's over, So like, I'm like, okay, they don't even, the radio, that's why I say radio rumors. There's some great radio people, but like, the radio used to be more of a mainstay before the world changed and became more internet focused. I was always downplayed the internet, the radio rumors, because those were more, they were fun. They were more talking points, and
sure,
and there's nothing wrong with that. But I started to realize that a lot of people can look at a game and tell you what's happening. I didn't play. I mean, I played, but I didn't play in high school. I didn't play in college, and I just didn't have that kind. That was not my physical skill, talent. I don't have that kind of body. As much as I love the game, I just wasn't that good. My mind for I can coach. I can coach 10-year-old girls. I mean, I coach all my girls. So like 10, 11, 12, I can get a heck of a team.
Yeah, you know how the game's played.
Oh, yeah, and I love the game. I'm just not that good at actually playing the game. But a lot of people can do a lot of like player eval, but not everyone could do what I could do, which was understand the CBA. Like, I met Larry Coon, and he has an FAQ, which is sort of famous, the CBA FAQ. And so FAQ stands for frequently asked questions. And before I met Larry, I kept emailing him questions, and he never responded. And then we finally met, and he's like, I've got like 5 or 6 emails from you that I'm researching because they weren't frequently asked questions. I was asking like the infrequently asked questions.
Was this before the site?
No, this was CBA FAQ was live.
Right.
This is got to be around 2000.
But you were asking the hard questions that weren't.
Well, because that's kind of the thing. It's like any other legal document. Words are insufficient in just at covering every aspect of life. That's why we have our legal system, the contract aspect of our legal system, which is like you have millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars, people legislating, arguing over what little words mean, what the comma, like what is the intent of the law, of the rule that was broken, or all the politicians who are legislating, they're writing law. The NBA has their version of that, and it's incomplete because it's the human language it's not perfect. And so I would ask Larry, like, what about in this particular case? And then Larry has great resources, and so he would reach out to somebody, and that person would say something like, well, that's unaddressed by the CBA, and because it doesn't exist, it's not ripe, if you know legal language, it hasn't been legislated, it hasn't been decided. If that were to happen, it would go to the NBA. The NBA would, the commissioner or whoever, or maybe the NBA and the NBPA, the Players Association, would argue it out and come up with a compromise or a solution. That happens. Like, when Nene signed a contract that was basically illegal with the Rockets, it went to the NBA and NBPA, and they came up with a compromise. And so there are these gray areas, and I had a knack for finding but it's still like, I had a conversation just a month or two ago about a player who is a rookie who has early bird rights, which the way that rights work is it takes 2 years to get early bird. And we're not going to get too much into the nuance other than to say, how could a rookie have something that takes 2 years to get to?
Right.
That doesn't make sense. And so I said, that doesn't make any sense. It can't be right. And then I looked at the CBA and the actual document, and went through. And the way it works is that there's stuff written here and here. I'm using my hands to say that there's stuff in the front of the document, and then there's stuff in the middle of the document. And you kind of have to tie it all together and get the exact wording. And ultimately, what I realized is that if you go to training camp with a team and they cut you before the season starts, then you don't sign with another team, because the rights end if you sign with another team, and then come back with that same team. Now you're still a rookie, but you have basically credit for 2 years with the team. So like that, here I am doing this for however long, and I'm reaching out to people who are like, do this professionally, and they don't know this, and they're like, I'm confused, and we're debating it, and I'm like, this is my interpretation. They're like, yeah, that looks right. And then we're reaching to someone else, and they're like, oh yeah, that's correct. That's the interpretation. It's like, there's stuff like that all the time. And like I find stuff with Larry's FAQ. I sent him something the other day that was like a little bit different than what he had written. I don't know if the rule changed. It's along the way. That's the other thing. It's a living, breathing document, and they can change it as they go, as long as they agree. The NBA can't change it. The NBPA can't change it. But if they agree to change it, they will. So there's like, I think, a little change where Larry needs to update his stuff just because it changed, and it's not.
Note to Larry.
Yeah, well, I send the email. He'll get to it. It's not even an issue. It's just, and it's not that he's wrong. It's that he's going by the document, but now the document is out of date because when I say the document, the CBA itself.
Sure.
It's been amended. And so, it's just like the Constitution, you have amendments and precedents and all that kind of stuff. So it's a very legal league. It's a bunch of contracts. It's a bunch of, lawyers have to go through everything, really.
Right. How long did it take you to become an expert in the CBA?
Well, I don't know.
Obviously, it doesn't happen from
Right.
one night to the next, but just was there a specific process? I mean, I've heard what Nate Duncan's process was, right, as far as the note cards
Right.
go, right? I've heard Larry's story. But is there anything different about how you learned the CBA?
I think Larry, and Larry can speak for himself, and he has, and certainly can talk, and Larry's great. But he's more of reading the document and then asking questions to people about that to get clarification on the things that are either poorly worded, which plenty is, or are just naturally ambiguous. For me, it was more looking at contracts or trades or cap sheets and reverse engineering why that happened. So I obviously had to get to a point where I had built up my career where I had access to information that maybe others didn't have. Mm-hmm. That took a career's worth of effort to get to that point. And you look at all these things, I run the numbers. I've been keeping cap sheets for, however long, 15, 18 years, I don't know how long. And trying to understand why is it this way? And so it was more of looking at the contracts and going backwards, looking at a trade. And it's like, I remember the Chris Webber trade. He went from Sac to Philly, mm-hmm. but the trade didn't make sense. And if you look at the trade that just went through, there were aspects of the Thunder Rockets trade that was a bunch of players like Derek Favors and whatnot, where you could look at it one way and say that's 100% illegal. And so if you look at it another way, it's 100% legal. So it's 100% illegal, 100% illegal. It depends on how you look at it. And so that's kind of the nuance, like with the Weber thing, where I was like, this can't be legal based on my understanding. And I was right based on that understanding, but there's more than one way to configure something. And so then I was like, oh, wow, there's a whole bunch of depth here I didn't know. And so that's kind of, I guess, an example of how I started to really dig into minute transactions to really and once you understand how that worked, then it raises a bunch of questions. And you just have to, I'm industrious. I'm good at building relationships so that I've done a credible job of representing myself in the public as far as how I write, mm-hmm. So that certain people in the industry who are in a position of knowledge, I guess they want to help they want truth and accuracy to be conveyed. Mm-hmm. I think that's probably it. So I'm trying to think the motivation of why people have reached out to me and why I've forged the relationships where I have the knowledge. I even talked to Adam Silver at some point about, and it's not like a private privileged conversation. It was at a press conference. I talked to him about what I do and whatnot. And he said that's really valuable because there is so much misinformation, so much lack of understanding, even within teams. Like if I could help teams, save the league time from having to hold hands of teams who may not understand the logistics of what they're trying to do, that's a valuable resource. So if I can help educate, either if I'm helping agents, players who become agents, people with teams, the general public, I'm helping the league in a way. So, it was pretty cool to get that kind of endorsement from the commissioner that there's value in what, I found value in what I do. I liked what I do. It's nice to hear that from the guy who's running the show.
Well, and I'm not Adam Silver, but I find value in what you do.
Well, thank you.
And I'm kind of shocked that there's that much nuance in the document, that things can be interpreted to such a degree.
Oh, absolutely.
Now, is there ever going to be a time where that nuance can be eliminated, or is it just simply because of the English language that will never be eliminated?
Well, it's like, is the legal system going to ever go away because everyone agrees on how a contract reads? Like I did in my family business, 100 years ago, there was a small claims thing where we had a contract that said deposits are non-refundable. Someone booked a party, and this was literally over $300, right? They booked a party and then they canceled, and we just had a policy, and it was in the contract. And so my folks sent me to small claims. It was for that, it was in a business that's doing however much money, $300 is not a lot of money, and they wanted me to get that experience. So I went, and the judge decided he doesn't like non-refundable clauses in contracts. And so we had to pay $300 for something that the lady who canceled it signed off on. And it's whatever. But I learned from that there's the nuance, there's the written word, and sometimes it's just like
interpretation,
or it just might be the person making the decision has a bug about something that they just don't like. And I mentioned a specific instance where a team signed a player to an illegal contract expecting the league to reject it, and then the league didn't reject it. They amended the rules with the Players Association's blessing, and they ended up with a contract that didn't serve the purpose of what they wanted with that contract. And that shouldn't happen based on the system. The system should have kicked that contract back.
Right.
But it didn't. And then, had they asked, can we do this? The answer would have been no. So they were like, we'll just do it, and it'll get kicked back. And if it works, then it works. And if it gets accepted, it gets accepted. But there were contracts, not to call out the Warriors, but they signed Mac McClung and a couple other guys to, basically illegal contracts. Just clerical error. Technically, it's an Exhibit 10. An Exhibit 9. You can't sign until you have 14 players. They had 13 or 12 or something. Sign these guys to Exhibit 9s. The NBA kicked the contracts back. They then signed JaMychal Green and one other person, something like that. And then they got to that number. And then this happened over a 2 or 3 day period. Re-signed the players to the exact same contracts, but now the exact same contracts were legal, whereas 2 days before they weren't. So, and that's not tough. The Warriors run a great show, so I'm not picking on them.
Sure.
It's just, the Matt Barnes, what was it? He was with Orlando, and the Magic and the Raptors tried to do a sign and trade via a mid-level exception, which is just not a legal thing. Phil Jackson tried to sign a player to a 3-year deal when they didn't have the means to do. There are mistakes, and not picking on anyone. It's just all teams make mistakes.
This is all objective,
right? Mistakes happen because it's complicated stuff. There's a lot of little detail. And there's a lot of nuance, and so there's no way to perfect it. I will say, last CBA, so that we had 2011 and then we had 2017, where we're about to go into a new CBA in theory. And so in 2011 it was acrimonious. In 2017 it was not. It was.
What does acrimonious mean?
It was a battle. It was a fight. It was not. The league was losing money. Teams were losing money. The NBPA did not agree, and from their point of view, the appreciation of franchises offsets any operational losses. Basically, if you're losing money year to year, but you're gaining 10 times that amount in the value of your franchise year to year, the owners don't view it that way. So
it's all a matter of accounting, right?
So there was a lot of argument over, and that was, it was a difficult thing, and so they resolved it, but it's all done typically. You go back year after year, usually done under the tension of lockout, of getting games started back up before Christmas, which is a big network thing.
Sure.
There was a year where we didn't have it by Christmas, and they ended up restarting it up in February. But imagine trying to write a document that is 600, 700 pages or whatever. And yes, you're mostly amending a previous document, and that kind of makes it worse because if the previous document wasn't well written, and that was based on the previous document that was also not well written, and then you amended it under difficult circumstances, and then you go back to that iteration. The most recent one, 2017, was more or less negotiated in maybe December, January. I forget the exact timing, but in that range. And then it wasn't actually codified until later and executed and started in July. So they used more time in the last CBA to actually clean out some of the gunk, I guess, that had built up. So this most recent one is a cleaner document.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean that because again, it's just we're human beings, and there's things that are confusing. They used to, there were literally, Larry would point out tons of things that were flat out contradictory, and he would point it out to the league, and then a lot of that kind of stuff was sort of cleaned up, but there's still stuff.
I was going to say, do you have a list of gunk somewhere?
I have a list of things that I think hurt the process, that hurt the system a little bit. Things like you can only give an extension for up to 120% of a player's salary, and then we've had such a growth. The cap rose last year to this year 10%. Mm-hmm. It's projected to run right now about 8.5, but it'll probably get to 10 again. Although we will have a new CBA, so maybe it won't matter. But if we're growing 20%, the system is designed roughly to grow 5% a year. That's like kind of how it's supposed to grow.
Okay.
But
why is that?
That's just kind of the standard. The league basically projects that this product will grow 5% every year. Like that's the natural expectation. And sometimes it's less, sometimes it's more, but that's the working expectation. And they go off of actual numbers. But when you're projecting down the road, we have a projection for next season. It's about 8.5% more, but the year after that we project 5% each year. That's how the CBA defines the growth. But if we're growing 20% a year, and you can imagine a player signed a contract 4 years ago, and it's grown. Let's say it grew, whatever. Obviously, we had the pandemic, so it didn't grow the same way. But if 120% of what you just got is below market, then you're not going to sign an extension. Now, there are some extensions that can say max, which is like Luka Doncic signed a max extension. There are some cases where that exists, but there are real cases where it doesn't exist, and that leads to a Gordon Hayward leaving Utah. Whereas had they had the ability at the time to give him what the market would have dictated, he might have. I would say he probably would have taken it and not play another year and then leave as a free agent. It takes away the protect. If you invest in a player, and I don't like to treat people like assets because they're human beings, but if you're investing in an asset and then you take some, a young player who's 18, 19, 20, whatever, develop them into an all-star and then lose them simply because on June 30th, you can't pay them one amount, but on July 1st or really July 6th, you can pay them a different amount. Like, that doesn't really make sense. Like, You should be able to, and when I say June 30th, they probably signed that in the previous July, right? So there's something about having money locked in that if you have to wait a whole year, okay, if it's enough money, but if there's a compromise, it's a lot better to, if you can get 80% of that money, but you know that you have it, so you go a whole year and you don't have to worry about being hurt, and you could just stay where you are and you're happy. But once you get to free agency, now you might lose that player because, in this case, he went to Boston, got hurt, and that's immaterial. I mean, fortunately for him, he got paid before he got hurt, and he's since been paid by Charlotte, so he's doing fine. But in that moment in time, Utah should have, by my interpretation, so that being able to pay him. And so and there's debate about that, but there's all kinds of little areas that I look at. I think one of the areas that I like that it seems like they're addressing, I actually wrote on it some time ago, the whole Ben Simmons thing about mental health. There's a lot of negativity towards Ben Simmons, arguably some of it earned, maybe not. I don't know his mental health situation, and It's easy to dismiss it. But in the CBA, there are clauses about what happened, and it's difficult to talk about, but like if the player passes, right? Like there's a death clause, like what happens? There's mental disability, if a player is permanently not able to function, there's a clause for that. But what do you do when a player's hurt, but they're not hurt necessarily physically, but there's an injury, a mental kind of injury? And it sounds like that concept is going into the new negotiation so that they'll have at least language protocol. I don't know how they'll handle it exactly, but there isn't enough to address that in the existing document. So it falls into the, gray area of just 30 different teams operating 30 different ways. And some areas need leadership, uniform leadership on this is an important enough issue. We've seen Kevin Love talk about these things, DeMar DeRozan. John Wall just had a really nice piece on his struggles. Money's great to have, and it solves some issues, but it doesn't solve everything at all. And if you've got things that are difficult, you can't just gloss it over and say you're too rich to have that issue. And it's easy, to treat players like robots or Avatar or 2K, they're just, but they are human beings. And having been around players for as long as I've been, I think you become sensitive. I've become sensitive to that. And so there are aspects of the CBA I think that are lacking in that kind of area.
Wow. Huh. That was 10 to 15 minutes of just pure masterclass on the CBA. I'd really, really appreciate that. But I want to take a step back, because at the end of the day here, what I'm hearing is that you started participating in forums, you started writing, you developed all these relationships as a result of being at the games and spending time with people, and your expertise in the CBA grew so deep that you can now tell teams where the nuances are. You can help teams, and even at the league level, you have you have an amount of knowledge to where you can look at the document and what's transpiring and actually help make change, which is fantastic.
Right. I mean, that would be a joy to, like, hey, if the NBPA or the NBA want any help, I would love to help with the negotiation. I know they're well situated; they've got a lot of great people, but if they want another opinion, that would be a joy. To at least give some thoughts, because I feel like I've worked it practically. I haven't worked it practically from a team point of view, because I haven't worked for a team making trades.
Right.
I've worked with agents in consulting, basically to help get their players to contract. Mm-hmm. And I've learned so much from that aspect as well, because writing for the public, you're basically you're adopting the team, and you're saying, I'm going to operate on what the team should do based on my understanding. Right. So it's a very team-centric point of view. Over time, I've learned the agent side in more depth as well, and that's. I helped a player 4 years ago, roughly, get to a contract, and helping his agent get through where, like, there were 13 teams who were interested, and then gradually, like, the offers didn't come, and then it was like maybe taking the minimum, but then a team made a trade, and then suddenly they had money, and then they got, like, about 80% of what they had hoped to get, which in a negotiation, if you get 80% of what you want, that's not bad at all. I mean, sometimes you get
your
more.
mom wouldn't think so, though.
Well, that's a different story. But also, you start at a certain point. You build in a good negotiation. You build in what you're not expecting to get. So
Sure.
You've got, like, what we're asking for, but what we want, and that. But the player reached out to me to make the final decision, and I had a conversation with the player, and then they thanked me for helping them, and their family. And you start to think, like, wow, this is like generational money and money that will help them and their family forever, if properly, if they take care of it properly. You learn, like, okay, there's a whole nother human element of it that goes beyond just, like, making a team better. Because that's kind of the logic of how I got into it. If you're writing for a team, the fans want to know how you get better. If you're the Warriors, you just want a championship.
Right.
How do you stay better? How do you stay on top?
I heard you say that the other day on the podcast you did, right? That's all the fans care about for the most part, is how does my team get better?
Exactly. And that's what I wrote from. And that's when I realized there's the CBA understanding of value, understanding of contracts, understanding of the markets, understanding of where things are going. That's where I learned how my ability to learn this stuff and communicate this stuff had value to an audience. It's not I don't have the audience that maybe someone who gets on the air and yells a lot and has big takes about stuff. Like, there are people who can
I don't know anybody like that.
There are people who can get bigger audiences than I can. That's fine. I don't need to. Not everyone wants to hear about what I value, but there's a large enough audience where I've had a career off of, servicing them. But I've expanded that to having worked with agents, and I've helped agents pass the exam to become certified, which to me is a real a joy, because, like, an agent needs to help a player navigate through a career, and if they don't know their stuff, and there's a certain number of agents who I've had heated conversations with about understanding, where it's like, dude, you don't even know what you signed your player's contract to. You're going to tell me your player that he has an option. He doesn't have an option. I can explain why it's not an option. That's a non-guaranteed contract. And I'm like, and he's telling another reporter, the other reporter's writing it like it's an option. I'm like, I'm looking at it. It's not, how can you read the contract that you signed and it's not, you don't even understand to communicate. I'm picking on one particular case, and this is a long time ago. But like, I want to make sure that if an agent is representing a player, players can't learn this stuff. I mean, Chris Paul, CJ McCollum, who are head of the union, they've been around for a long time, and that's a different aspect. But the average player has a 5-year career, give or take. They don't have time to learn.
Well, it's not in their best interest to.
They have to be great basketball players. You have to spend all your time doing that.
It's a full-time job.
Right. And so I can't imagine how not to mention that even if you do learn this stuff, I spend all my time understanding where teams are going, what the market is, where some teams, like for instance, where the Rockets are is not where the Warriors are, right? Like they have different priorities. A good season for the Rockets might be getting Victor, and a good season for the Warriors is getting another title, right? So it's a very different situation. Wembanyama, I still don't quite say it right yet.
Wembanyama.
Wembanyama.
Who knows?
I'm working on it.
We'll work on it.
Yeah.
By the time Summer League comes around, we'll get there.
I watched the game the other day, and he's incredible. And so Scoot, there's a lot. But the point is, everyone's going in a different direction. And how could a player know that? Like what's sometimes taking a little bit less, but in a better opportunity is going to be better for a player's career. But then also, making sure those things that we mentioned, like a death clause, like make sure some agents may not know that. And some teams don't want to necessarily give what is like a life insurance for their player. There's another path where you can actually reimburse the player for life insurance. So there are ways to make sure that the family's protected in case of something absolutely horrible happening, which, God forbid, but you have to protect your clients. And so if I can help agents do a better job taking care of players, then I'm also contributing to a better NBA in theory, or a better world in some way, making sure these players are taken care of.
I think you absolutely are.
Trying.
Now, you wear a lot of hats, right? Like we discussed earlier, we've got cap strategist, capologist, writer, instructor. How would you describe like your current endeavors as far as like what are you spending most of your time doing right now? And talk a little bit about, a lot of people listening may go, holy shit, Eric Pincus is so much smarter than I am.
I don't know about that.
He knows a lot, right? Like what I want you to do, if you can, is help paint a picture as far as what your day-to-day looks like so that you can actually stay up to date on what's going on and actually have an intelligent take on what it is you're speaking about, because there's a lot, right?
Right.
There's 30 teams. There's 450 players.
More than that now, right? So, yeah, because you have two ways, and then you have camp invites. We're at about closer to the max is 20, so we're close to about 600 players right now. And then when we get to the start of the season, it'll go down to about 510. We call it 500. Not everyone carries two ways, but let's call it 500 roughly.
Okay. So yeah, break it down for me. Let's say I wanted to be Eric Pincus, okay?
For a day.
I'm big on habits.
Right.
I'm big on process, right? So walk me through what your process looks like so that you can be up to date, as informed as possible, and can actually make the type of connections that you just, with all the knowledge you just dropped.
Well, in an ideal day, I'm probably going to bed around 2 to 3 in the morning, and I'm waking up around 10.
Okay.
But some I think it was today or yesterday. One of these days I had to wake up like at 7:30. Yeah, yesterday. I'm not a big fan of waking up early, but I work late, so I'm on a later schedule, and it gives me a little bit more time to work without the buzz of the day, because there's a lot of activity of like reacting to what's going on. Whereas at night it's not usually, and so I can kind of unpack it all. But part of what I do is keep track of all transactions. So at times of the year, it's completely nonstop of just like July, which also coincides with our immersive in Las Vegas. It's like the amount of work I have to do from the draft or leading up to the draft all the way through, but until I get home from SBC and catch up everything, there's a good month of like just nonstop.
And where do you keep track of these?
It's a combination of things, customized software that I've designed that may or may not go public at some point, may work privately. I'm still deciding what to do with it.
Going back though to the skills you developed, right?
So
as a wedding MC.
Well, we had however many dollars of income we made per year, and we had at some point up to 50 employees, 30 to 50 employees. So I designed our time clock system, our payroll system, our accounting system. Like all of our books that went to, I did all of our books up into the tax return, the CB. I didn't actually file that, but the point is, all of these skills I'm using to build out tools for myself, and then tools I use. So, like for instance, someone with a team asked me a question about a trade that happened like in 2019. And so I'm able to pull that up immediately. I said, just let me finish walking the dog. And so I went inside and immediately can give that information. And then, a former SBC student who works for a team, reached out to me this morning, and we did a quick session, about 30, 40 minutes of just going over a couple things. I gave a couple of tools that I wouldn't normally give, but because the student is someone I believe in and have a long relationship with now at this point, gave these tools to them so that they could be better at what they do. So, but the day-to-day is putting, keeping cap sheets. I used to just do it in Excel. It's a lot of work. There's a lot of stuff that happens, and it becomes a lot. I still use Excel, but in a way that's different than maybe the average person. It's all in a database. It's all, and so, but then there's a certain amount of just like, obviously watching games and going to games. That's the in-season lifestyle. I still write for Bleacher, so I, in theory, write 2 a week, give or take. So I need to write. And I can't it's not just like, oh, whatever I want to write. I have to actually write something that moves the story forward of whatever's happening. My main coverage is a little bit more Lakers, but NBA overall because I'm in LA and there's LeBron's there. They love the Laker coverage, but I write anything that is what's going on. So there's, NBA-wide or whatever, anything at all. So I need to constantly have, like, feed them material, proposing like, hey, we'll write this, what do you think about this? And we're constantly communicating about what we're going to write. And then I have to actually do the job of writing and research and putting it out there. And then there's communicating with all the various friends that I have. That's kind of what I've learned through the years is you make contact with people and eventually you have relationships with people who move around, work in different jobs, different teams, different positions. And so there's a lot of like, hey, what do you think? There's the game with Victor and Scoot, and you're like texting people like, this is ridiculous, right? I'm not crazy. Like, these guys are really good. And like I told you, and there's a lot of, I communicate with a bunch of former students every day in a Discord server that I have that connects SBC students and other people who love basketball year after year. So we've got a lot of different alum from different years who are now working, collaborating, and I workshop a lot of my thoughts there, and we sort of just talk hoops and argue and all the good stuff that you would do about why we love this. Obviously, I take care of my family and do all this stuff. I have three kids, high school age, one's in college, and so there's my middle child who's in high school has a job now, so I drive her. My wife and I usually. She doesn't work every day, but 2-3 days a week. One of us is driving her there, one's picking her up. And so there's some of that. I walk the dog a lot. But then there's a lot of tutoring. There's a lot of prep with SBC. I mean, the immersive, we spend months in meetings. Sure. Prepping. And so let's see. There's updating the cap sheets. There's communication. There's just dealing with the emails of life and, that everyone has just the, make things happen so that, you can function, that, you have your health insurance and your car insurance and your this, that, and the other thing. But sometimes it's just, how can I move things forward? So it's either professionally or personally, like, where should I be putting my time? Is, like a lot of people want to do radio. I do a lot of radio spots. I do a lot of podcasts. I've done NBA TV for several years. Pre-pandemic, it's been a little thin on that approach since the pandemic. But like, where can my time be best spent? And that's really where I'm debating. I'm always fighting, like, where can I put my time, because it gets pulled in a lot of directions really quickly, because there's just so much going on in the NBA.
Yeah, there is. And that's one thing that I was listening to a podcast you appeared on a couple days ago. And one of the things I was most impressed about is just the variety of topics and players and teams that you can not only like talk about on a surface level, but from a business perspective.
Right.
And immediately, just in preparation for this, I started thinking, well, what kind of daily research does that take? Right. So I'm curious. Let's say I'm running a wedding business, okay, and I want to become a media personality in the NBA, right? And let's just assume that I'm a decent writer, right? Talk to the audience a little bit about like what it takes, what you read, right? Obviously now you've got some systems in place, right? So you know how to get the information that you need in order to, be an expert. But I'm just, I think that a lot of people say they want to be a writer or a media personality and really have absolutely no idea how much time they have to spend actually reading articles, looking at cab sheets, watching games, talking to people, listening to podcasts, looking at Twitter, right? I mean, it's a lot.
Yeah.
And to have the level of expertise that you have, you have more expertise than anybody I know. And I know a lot of folks.
Well, I've gotten to a point where I really try to reduce like my consumption of other writers' material. But so there's a different perspective. Obviously, when you're up and coming,
sure,
you want to absorb and you want to learn from others. I'm at a point where I don't want other takes and opinions to color my analysis. Like I don't want to listen to somebody and then like, oh yeah, and now that's my opinion, because that's not my opinion. I'm just adopting someone else's.
Sure.
And that's kind of where I am in my career. I sort of have to. So like there's a lot of great stuff that I don't listen to, that like I don't listen to Zach Lowe's show. I don't listen to Nate's show. Not that I don't want to or not that I don't value them. It's just like I'm going to let them do their thing. It's brilliant what they do, but I don't want to adopt what they're thinking and take on their points of view. But when you're learning, that's really valuable. Where like Art Thompson III was the Clipper beat reporter, and I followed him around my first year. I had credentials. I don't think he knew that I was following him around. And we became tight. He's a good dude. We still keep in touch. But he's retired from this field. But I just watched how he handled himself. Like how did he communicate with the coach? How did he communicate with the players? Where did he go? Like who did he defer to? Right? Because you kind of defer at that stage in the game. You defer to, and you still do, to the national TV and the like spectrum. If you're at the Lakers, or is it Bally's, I think, for the Clippers, whoever's doing the Clippers, you want to make sure that the shot of Kobe is on the camera, right? And it's not the back of my head, right? Like, so there's certain things that I learned from just watching. And then gradually you start to like build your own personality. But the actual art of like writing is hard because, and I work with a lot of our students on writing, like simplifying your process. Like you can't just, like 80% of what you wrote is maybe meat, 20% is fat. Like all the words that don't belong there, you need to get rid of. And so learning how to like, and like I still work with my editors, and it's still an aspect where they're like, hey, can we get to the point a little quicker? Because I do come from a little bit of a generation where you could build into a story and kind of do like a setup and then take someone into the journey, and then your main point may not be the first thing you say, it's maybe the second thing, where you're kind of like, here's the landscape and look at this, boom, and now let's break it down. Or even some stories I love writing are like, I'm not even getting to the point, let's get to the point together. Like, let's get to a conclusion. I'm not going to give you the conclusion. Here's the story, let's get there. To me, that's more interesting.
Sure.
In this world we live in, it's
gotta be quick, right?
Yeah, like, and it's I'm not saying, oh, the world isn't good or bad. I'm just saying, like, there's a different, like, the internet existed when I started, but it doesn't exist the way it exists now in social media. There's so much competing attention. People are like, you have TikTok and Twitter and all the different social media. Everyone has so many avenues to consume, and people have shorter attention spans because of there's such a barrage of things.
Sure.
So, like, my editors are constantly like, we got to just hit it right off the bat. Here's the point, boom, break it down. And the kind of nuance that I'd like to go into, we don't always get to in Bleacher. So that's cool. I just have to shape what I write to the audience a little bit while being true to myself. So there's no one single way to do it. If I'm talking to someone who's just getting started, most of what you write can be condensed easily by 10, 20%. I got great value working for the LA Times where you didn't go by word count, you went by inches. And if you're actually printing this in a paper, there's only so much physical space on the page.
Right.
So I was fortunate enough to have like real stories in a newspaper, which was like a dream. And you'd write the story and then they're like, okay, we need to cut, however much. And then you're like, okay, boom, easy. 10% gone, no problem. 20%, easy. Yeah, I don't need that. you look at it closely, all that, yeah, whatever, it's not that important. Then you got down to like, oh crap, okay, now everything that's in here is meat. And then you start to then you have to really prioritize. So, I've had to learn how Bleacher, in my case, or when the LA Times, who are they trying to talk to? How are they trying to connect with the audience? And what is it that's pulling that audience in? And I have to write to that. And you have to find a way to do that and still be yourself and still have your values and express what you're trying to do. So it's still a journey for someone who's done this as long as I have, as far as that's concerned. But here's an easy tip. You're stuck, start at the middle, start at the end. Like start your story where I know this part, right? Like you don't have to start at the beginning. Sometimes starting at the beginning is the hardest thing to do. You don't know how to draw someone in. But if you start where I know that this one section, I know what I want to say. So you start there. Well, now you write, sometimes I've written that and you write to the end and then you're like, well, how do I get to that? And so now you start working backwards. And by the time now you're not stuck. And once you're flowing, it's a lot easier to write the beginning when you already have, so that, you're not, it's not like an essay test in a class where you can, I don't know if they do that anymore, but I used to have to write in a class,
right,
in a book. Right, like that would be, when I was at UCLA 100 years ago. So yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think the main thing is don't start at the beginning if it's not working. You have to write so that you have to write enough. Working at the LA Times, I did the blog. We did 3 to 5 posts a day, but they were short. And so Vander Blue picked up from from the G League, whatever. I got to write 300 words on that. So you're like, okay, this happened, and then you're padding it with these were his stats, and this is where he went to school, whatever.
Sure.
Whatever. But the nonstop writing and then getting to the point and being concise and learning how to trim it down, doing it over several years is what made it. So now it's you need me to write something, boom, I can knock it out. And I wrote the article the other day, Lakers, Indiana, and I wrote the detail on that, and I had to rush. I didn't have any time. I had a lot going on just schedule-wise. Knock that thing out in a couple hours. Another article might take 4 or 5 to really craft and really research and think it through. I had already done the research. I already thought it through, so I just needed to spit it out. But some, for think about people writing game stories, after a game or whatever, you just gotta rush, knock that thing out, boom. So there's some of it just comes from just doing it and don't hold back and let it be crappy, let it be awful until write enough that you're okay, now I'm good. I didn't start out great. Whether I'm great now or not, that's subjective. But when you start out, it might not be great. If you're a songwriter, the first song you write might not be great.
Yeah.
Don't be so hard on yourself that you can't stink it up for a while. Try not to stink it up in public as much, but write for yourself until you know how to write, and you're okay, this is good. And then, even when you think it's good now, there's probably 20% that's fat. Trim 20% of that out.
That's good advice. I think it was Hemingway who said the first draft of anything is shit. Literally, I think in those words, and that's probably the truth.
I mean, I think there's some truth in that. Every so often I can get it right on a first draft, but yeah, some of the struggle of working with an editor who sees it a different way is very helpful and educational. So that collaboration, I believe in what I'm doing. Why is it different? Why do I have to make it different? I got it kicked back. I sent it to them. They're like, hey, can you work it? And it doesn't usually take much, but you're you start to understand and see it through someone else's eyes. That's very helpful, I think, as long as you have a good editor.
Right. To be you, how many hours worth of research or actual work does it take?
Well, that's the key is that, how much of this is actual work for me in the sense of I'm doing what I like to do. So it's easy to if I go and I hang out with some friends and we're sitting there arguing about, will Russ work?
Sure.
With the Lakers. Does that count in my hours of work? It kind of is an aspect of me thinking it through. So, and if I'm doing that on a forum with some friends, a private forum I've been in 20 years, just people who we just talk from the old days and we still argue stuff nonstop. Is that me doing work? It kind of is. So it's, if I can convince them the people I've been arguing with for 20 years and have a strong argument there, it's maybe more ready for prime time and for the public. So, or just, communicating with people who work with teams or agents or whatever, or communicate with them my take. And so it's hard to say. I mean, I don't know. This is just kind of what I do all the time.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like,
That's who you become.
I log hours with Bleacher, but like, even that's abstract because like, it's like I'm not working for Bleacher right now, but technically, just talking some of this stuff through, it contributes there too. So right. I'm not going to bill them for any of this time, but like it's still part of the process. So I would say that I spend a lot of time, and that's why when I've already done the research. So if you say like, where are the Memphis Grizzlies going? Like I've already thought through where they are now and where they are next. You can only project next year so far, and you can only project really 2 years, but I at least have an idea of where they are over this year, the next year, and the year after. So,
so you've done this work already.
I've already done it. Like, so the Pelicans, they just extended Nance. They just extended McCollum. So not this year, but the next year and then the year after, like they could have had some cap room. Now they're completely out of cap room. So now it's maybe more of monitoring. Are they going to be in the tax? And because they have Zion's extension is going to kick in. So like now their battle is going to be more about luxury tax, and that might change with the new CBA. How's the new TV deal going to impact that? So these are the kind of things that's like where you are with the Pelicans. Where are they going with who they are? Whereas like I know like the Rockets just signed Bruno Fernando. Mm-hmm. And so they already had 17 guaranteed players. They cut Sterling Brown, or did they trade him? No, they traded him to the Thunder, and then they got, was it Ty Jerome? And I think they cut Ty Jerome, right? So they cut Ty Jerome. So they went from 18 to 17. So I'm like, okay, they're getting closer. You have to get to 15 before the start of the season. So that's easy when you have non-guaranteed players. You cut the non-guaranteed ones. Every so often, a guaranteed player will get cut because a non-guaranteed player kills it in camp, and they beat that player out, even though they had guaranteed money. But I'm like, the Rockets got to get down to 15. So, okay, so they got rid of Ty Jerome. They're going to get, but no, they gave Bruno Fernando guaranteed money. So now they're back at 18. So, like, how are they going to get to 15 in the next few weeks? The Jazz, too many players. The Thunder, too many players. So that's what I'm keeping my eye on right now. So, like, what transactions are they going to make to get down to 15? They don't have to make trades. They can just cut people. But it's usually better if you can make a trade so you don't have to pay people not to play.
Right.
But
so where's all this? Where all this work that you've done? Does this just all live in your head, or do you have documents somewhere where you have a basic outline of what's transpired? I'm sure alongside with the cap sheets, what the strategy might be, what you're thinking about moving forward.
Right. I keep track of it in different ways. I've got it in a database. I've got it in a written log, basically per team, so that when I look at the history of what they did, I can trace transactions. Because when I do tutor, it's a great exercise to go from like, okay, this is where the team was at the end of 2021, the end of that season. Here they are at the start of 21-22. How did they get there? Or where are they at the end of 21-22? How did they get from the end of this season to the end of that season? What were the transactions that they made over the course of that year? Mm-hmm. And you go through the cap mechanics of what they did and all of that. So I keep records of all that in different ways so that I can retrace the steps. I'm organized. I guess that's the key way of looking at it. I have it in different, because I get it from some of the data from different places. So I have it organized in different ways, all accessible. All my notes are organized. So I don't know if everything that I have would translate to someone looking at it and go, I know what that means.
Sure. It means something to you though.
Right. Like I have a pretty in-depth system. I don't want to say it's the best or whatever compared to anyone else. I don't know. I know what I do, and I know that I can answer a question about almost any team. I mean, it helps. When I did NBA TV, like they would, you'd have an earphone, rather, something in your ear, and the producer would say, "All right, we're going to do a segment on the Pacers," and then the host would be like, "So the Denver Nuggets, they're gonna." And so I'd already flipped. I had like a little tablet, and I like pulled up all my notes, and then they're like, "So and they call a different team," and I'm like, "Oh," but then you get past like, okay, don't panic. I know all this, but it's hard to like TV's a little harder because you can't like just glance at it. Radio's easy. If this was the kind of show that we were doing today where you wanted me to look up stuff, I'd have like something out so I could. The exact numbers I don't know, but I know the story of each team, like where they're going, what they're battling, what they're facing.
Right. I was going to ask you, do you feel like based on the moves that you've been observing for however many years, you understand exactly what it is that they're at least trying to accomplish?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, some are a little more diligent in how they manage their, and this is not a criticism, but Tim Connolly of the Nuggets was generous in how he gave out contracts. Like his players did have some incentives, but generally they got more than what they could have. He was quicker to give them contracts, and his players seemed to reward him with the performance. Now, is that directly tied to how good the Nuggets played and how they had a strong chemistry? And they obviously injuries have derailed what they've done.
Sure.
And Tim's moved on to the Wolves. But there is sort of like, okay, I see what they're doing, and why it's players aren't worrying about their contracts. They're not going into a year wondering if they're going to get paid. Whereas with Ayton this last year, the Suns didn't pay him. It kind of led to a little bit of a fracture, and sometimes just the smallest fracture. Not to put this on Ayton, not to put it on anyone, but they weren't on the same page cohesively, and then they got to the finals and something didn't work. Or they didn't even get to the finals this last year. I don't know. Let's see. They fell to the Mavericks. Like they had a step back, but did that contribute? I feel like, again, to go back to what we said way earlier, is that they are human beings, they're people, and you don't feel valued. Then like if the Lakers spent all summer trying to trade Russell Westbrook, and then he's there and he's got to perform, and the media is asking him, do you feel like they want you? He's like, it doesn't matter if they want me. I'm here. I'm going to just be me. Like, you can like Russ or dislike Russ. That's hard as a human being to hear all the stuff that they're legit trying to trade you and they don't, and you got to like function
right
in this environment. That's not an easy thing to deal with. So I try to have some level of empathy for the players about that. But anyway, it's a complex thing. It's
very complex.
Yeah.
And one thing that, just listening to you talk right now and the podcast you did a few days ago and some other media appearances you've done, I've thought about just, you are obviously close with a lot of different people across the league, right? Different players, different teams, coaches, whatever it might be, right? You are embedded within the NBA family, but it's also your job to speak objectively about what it is you see, right? Based on just
right.
what it is you're looking at, right? There must be a fine line there as it relates to what you will or won't write about, right. What you will or won't comment about. Because again, you're dealing with the league, right?
Right.
You deal with the league, you deal with teams, you deal with agents, right? You deal with so many different people that, like, do you ever worry that something you're going to say is going to offend somebody?
I don't know about offend. It gets complicated because, I was hired to help a player get from where they were as a pending free agent to a contract, and so before the trade deadline, I was basically hired to do so. So I let Bleacher know that like I'm helping this particular player, and they're confident. Like I have to have built up a trust with Bleacher so that I know I can tell that to my editor, and that's like under lock and key. No one's gonna, so I'm not betraying any trust. I'm not getting into the detail, but I can't really write on that player situation. So there is some level of conflict that I have as a journalist. You're supposed to, whatever. So wherever there's a conflict, I have to, handle it and make it clear to Bleacher, like, this is where I'm at. But like there are aspects where, I don't know it's about offending, but it's more like, for me, I'm not as interested as, like, I respect what Adrian Wojnarowski does with ESPN, what Shams Charania of The Athletic, and what all the other great reporters who are newsbreakers do. And I break news in different ways, and there's plenty of news I've broken through the years that, but I find that like people forget who broke it anyway. And when you get something wrong, they remember that. That's for sure. If you're the one who broke it, like I broke a POW extension when I was with Hoopsworld before the LA Times, and like then the LA Times hired me. But like breaking stories is cool. I'd rather break the details, or what I'd rather do is predict what's going to happen. Like that's where like if my analysis can show you this, that, and the other thing. Like I wrote like C.J. McCollum and the Pelicans. I've heard there's some buzz of that. This is why it makes sense. This is why I think it has some legs. Hit it 2 or 3 more times before it happened. Then it happened, and I'm like, okay. When I look to my editors and they ask me to write predictive pieces, and my predictive pieces actually predict what's going to happen, and it actually happens, that to me is me doing what I'm supposed to do. But actually breaking stuff, it's a challenge, and I've expressed this to my editors. It's if I go public with everything that I'm talking to people about, I'm not going to hear as many things from the people I'm talking to.
Sure.
Now there are some, the people like Woj and whatnot. They become an instrument of the NBA,
sure.
Where a team now, by the way that he's their broadcast partner. He works for ESPN. That's a broadcast partner of the league. He's basically functionally an arm of the league. That's not an insult. I'm not criticizing or anything. I'm just saying they go to him to basically tell other teams, this is what we're doing. This trade's going to happen, and this player's off the market. That's part of the process. I don't need to be that guy. I don't want to be that guy. The amount of work I do as it is enough to then also have to constantly be putting it out in the public. Mm-hmm. But it's more about, I'd rather have the information and have good intel and know more and say less, but pick and choose where it's appropriate to say what's right and what, like here's some news. I'd rather use it with Bleacher in a way that is predictive and, maybe I'm predicting something that I've heard is happening. And maybe I'm caging it as a prediction and maybe I know that but then again, like there's nothing you can know that is going to happen until it happens. Like it's almost pregnant kind of thing. They're really close to making this deal, but until they make the deal, it's not a deal. Mm-hmm. It's just theoretical. Yes, they're trying to make it happen, but a lot of things don't happen that teams think are going to happen. And that's why I got like a text I have to answer where like someone's saying this. And I'm like, yeah, well, there's a lot of unreliable narrators in this league. This is a poker league. It's not a blackjack league when it comes to the truth. Blackjack, you got what you got, right? You get dealt a 10 and you get another 10, you got 20, and the dealer has 16 and they hit and bust, whatever. But if you get 16, you at least have a choice. But sometimes your choice is you hit and now you got a 10 and you busted, or if you stand and the dealer has 10 and now they get 20, you lost no matter what. So there are some nuances counting cards. Like maybe there's ways of gaming blackjack, but you play poker, you get dealt like 2-8 offsuit and you bet it right and the players around the table, you might win a nice little pot with nothing, right? So it's a league where the truth is slippery in the NBA, and it's not a bad thing. It's just what people say and what really is don't always match. And so I've learned that earlier on in my career. Mistakes, you believe someone who's in a position of power because they're in a position of power, and then you realize like, oh, they're in a position of power, but that doesn't mean they're right. It doesn't mean it's going to happen.
Right. Well, that's part of what being in a position of power allows you to do, right? Is create that perception that everything you're saying is correct. Right.
And that's, I respect people who've made a lot of money in their career for their success. I'm not just going to listen to them and assume that what they're saying is true just because they're a billionaire, a millionaire, or whatever. It's like, okay.
Have you always been that way?
Well, no. When I first started, okay, they said that, so it's true. But then you realize when you got burnt that it wasn't true. And it's like, it's not even that it wasn't true. What they told you was true. It just didn't happen.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like they thought it was going to happen. An example, this is not a personal one, but like Dr. Buss, a former Laker, the late owner of the Lakers, and Glenn Taylor discussed a KG trade back in the day. And then ultimately, from what I understand, KG, it was around the time Kobe had demanded a trade, and KG didn't want to be a part of that nonsense. Didn't happen. Went to the Celtics. But if you hear about how like the Lakers owner and the Wolves owner are meeting to get a KG trade done to LA, like that's going to happen. So at the time I had intel, like this is going to ownership. If something goes to ownership, it's pretty much going to happen. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, yeah, I've heard KG's coming to the Lakers. And I did hear that, and it was true because Dr. Butts and the owners were talking. I'd heard that was happening. Does that mean I was wrong if I say KG is going to be a Laker and he wasn't? Well, yeah. But at the same time, it also almost happened because these people spoke and with the intention of that. And KG basically said, I don't want to do it.
Sure.
So is what it is. But there's a lot of that. Like kind of go back to the original question about I'm not going to write necessarily my thoughts unfiltered about how someone's doing. If I don't like sometimes you're like, you make mistake after mistake. Why did they do that? There was a franchise, not in LA, that for a series of years made very questionable decisions. And so I try not to be disrespectful, you try to be professional. Maybe in a podcast setting, you might be a little bit more less careful about how you say it, but I really try to, be respectful of, and again, it's like, it might not even be the GM. The GM may be very qualified, and it might be, I've talked to a personality in the industry who was a GM at a point, who had to deal with the owner's kid calling him up screaming who to take in the draft, 20 minutes or 10 minutes before their pick. It's got to be this guy. It's got to be this guy. You got to. It's like, how do you function? Not every organization is functional. It might be a great GM forced to make a move they flat out don't believe in, because it's like either you make the move or get fired, or so if either you don't make the move and get fired because the owner's telling you to make the move, or you make the move that won't work, and so now you're going to get fired because it's not going to work. You're just delaying when you get fired. Right. That's the blackjack analogy, right? Where sometimes it is just that simple, where it doesn't matter what you do with your cards. The best operators can, manipulate the cards well, but if you play poker, it's not the cards, manipulating the people and understanding the people, understanding instead of 8 table of, Texas Hold'em, maybe it's a 30 table. And a lot of people fold right off the bat, right? Like the Rockets are probably going to fold and try to get Victor, and some of these teams, it looks like the Jazz are folding early, and then there are other teams who are maybe the Lakers because they have LeBron, maybe they're willing to put more into a pot, even if they don't have what it takes to. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, but maybe they go for it. Maybe that means exiting Westbrook. I don't know. We'll see. But there's been certainly conversation about that, debate about that. All of these things are 30 teams, 30 players, all arguing over the same stuff with everyone's unreliable in their narration. So when it comes to, I try not to be disrespectful. I try to honor that, the people making this. Just to wrap up this point, I had a meal with Billy King when I did NBA TV, and I got insight into how the KG Paul Pierce trade that gave the Celtics the picks that ended up letting them become Tatum and Brown, and that was a disaster for the Nets, and he ended up losing his position. But how much was it? That's on his resume. You're going to blame him if you're a Nets fan for doing that. But if you hear some of the conversation of what went down, and again, but that's his point of view too. So I have to understand, I got his take on how it went down. If I got someone else's take, it might be different. But I understand the decisions that go into that might be way more complex than just the knee jerk at a bar, this guy's an idiot because he did this. It's maybe, but at the same time, if he didn't do it, he would have been fired. So, it gets complex.
Who would you say are the most objectively functional teams in the NBA? Where we're making decisions based on data.
Right. I mean, it's
based on rational ideas.
I want to say that that's a transient state where it's you're rarely, a team is rarely in that state for a long period of time. Now, the Spurs have had a very long period of success, and Greg Popovich will be the first to say he doesn't have a career unless they got Tim Duncan. And Tim Duncan is why he's Greg Popovich. And that was real easy because he was the number 1 pick and they got the balance. It was supposed to go to the Celtics by the odds. It went to the Spurs. Duncan carried that. Duncan is arguably a top 5 NBA player of all time. You can put him neck and neck with Kobe. You can probably put both of them, depends on you, without getting into it, above certain players, below certain players. But Duncan he has a surprisingly strong case for greatest of all time. I don't think he's number 1, but he's in that conversation more than maybe just he didn't have the big personality. That's if there's a demerit, it's that he didn't have the flair that Kobe had. Mm-hmm. Kobe also beat the Spurs head to head way more, so he gets the nod there. But the Spurs were early investing internationally, so they had an advantage that others didn't have. Mm-hmm. And now others have caught up, and so now that international advantage may not exist with the Spurs, and they're going through it, which is natural. Like they've been mediocre for a while. They finally accepted we got to go down to get maybe a Victor or a Scoot or something like that, and so they traded one of their best players, DeJounte Murray, to the Hawks. So, how long do the fans look at them losing, and if they're bad for 2-3 years, do they start to say, oh, they're out of touch, and now they're no longer the Spurs of old when they used, but really it was just you got Duncan and he carried the franchise for 20 years.
Right.
I look at what Sam Presti's doing. I look at what the Jazz just did, right? And it's a lot easier to like applaud and say, good job getting out and tearing something down for value. Like, man, you guys killed it. Like the Jazz got a ton of picks. Look at all this. That's amazing what they got. They got so many picks for they basically did what Presti did in several years. They did in like 2 months. They got all the picks that they got for Donovan. And also my advice, not that Danny Ainge or Zanuck were listening to my advice, but my advice was that they should trade both Mitchell and Gobert. Like people asked me, I did Utah some programs, and they were like, who should they pick to build around? I'm like, I would let Danny do what Danny does, draft, trade, go, but tearing down is a lot easier than building back up. Mm-hmm. Presti has the track record of all the guys he drafted, KD and Russ and Harden, and getting Ibaka and Giddey, and trading for Shea, and like there's all these nice moves they've done, but building it back up is way harder to get back to that top. So I can praise the moves that Daryl Morey has done. He's very creative and over creative, and probably gets a little too cute sometimes, but are we judging that he's had successful franchises that always go to the playoffs and get usually to at least the second or maybe the third round? Or do we say you're not winning titles, so you failed? I mean, where's the measure of that success? Mm-hmm. 30 teams, only one wins. And if you go historically, most don't, the Lakers, the Spurs, the Warriors, wherever LeBron was, like those are the teams that won. And maybe you have the Raptors and the Pistons in there and the Mavericks, but mostly it's like just those handful of teams that have won. So has everyone else failed and been bad? No, it's just like Presti had a great run. They never won the title, but look, KD, all those guys. So there are a lot of teams that make really interesting moves. The Warriors have a budget that other teams can't match. So what happens in the case of the Warriors in most situations is they stay invested in Draymond, Clay, Steph, but they don't keep the Wisemans, Kumingas, Moody, and they trade those assets out to save money because they can't pay, most teams can't pay $100 million in tax. And then the older players get older, and because they don't have those young legs to back them up, mm-hmm. they get forced into more minutes than they can handle, or you get older players and the team just gets old and just ages out and falls off. The fact that the Warriors have that budget, does that mean they're more functional because they're richer? You know what I mean? It's like other teams could be more functional, but they don't have the same bankroll, and that's not fair. The NBA, CBA is designed to legislate parity as much as possible.
Sure.
We'll see what changes come in the new CBA. Do they... I know the Warriors would love to get some of their pieces out of the tax and find a way to reduce the tax bill by changing the rules. I don't think that those same teams are going to vote for a yes on saving the Warriors a lot of money.
Right. What would you say is the most rewarding part of all the hats you wear? What makes Eric Pincus smile?
Outside of like family stuff and things like that. Or little silly things that are entertaining. In my professional capacity, I honestly love what we do with SBC. The result, the process, I love it. All the fun that we have in doing what we do in Vegas and doing what we do year round. But actually helping our students get jobs is probably the most rewarding. like helping an agent pass the agent's exam, seeing our students go from, just somebody who, we saw for a week and then we've kept in touch and now they've got an opportunity and then they're running with that opportunity and now they're, like a Buddy Scott or a Makar with the Nets, or, Chanel Manis is now working with the Suns, and or Jeff Siegel with Clutch, or like you start going through the list. I could spend the whole show talking about the number of cases. And that's, I'm not here to puff up our brand or what we do, what we're working on. But I keep in touch with these students for multiple years. And just like I said with, the MBA aspect of you get to know people and then eventually they're you're friends with these people.
Yeah.
So
they become your peers.
Right. And so I worked with Makar and I tutored him after he did SBC, and then he got an opportunity for an interview. So I helped him prep for that. And then he got the job, and, now it's go run with it, do your thing. And any way I can help. But obviously now it's a little sensitive because I'm media and he's professional. So I have to, there has to be a divide, just similar with, when I'm consulting for someone with Bleacher, I can't write about that player. So I let him do his thing. And, but if Chanel needs anything, or if anybody, any of our former students, I'm there to help them. And to me, there's enough time. It's always a battle, but of getting enough time. But I can have a conversation with someone, and
Sure.
on Discord, it's even easier. So I have a Discord with all our former students, and it's just send me a message, and I'm very responsive, and helping them get to that, because I've had a fortunate career. Some of it's luck, some of it's earned. And if we can help people get to that, not everybody gets everything they want all at once. That's just not life. But if we can, help them get to that next stage, and then it comes back, because now I've got, people in the industry who I now, I can't call upon Makar and ask him anything about the Nets. It's just not going to happen. That's privilege now, and now there's a wall. But I've contributed to his success, and there are things I can ask him that are general. That hey, what's your interpretation of this? And I'm going to him about a CBA thing. This is my interpretation. Am I crazy? He's like, yeah, that's how I see it. Whatever. I'm not saying anything that should get him in any trouble, because there's nothing that he's done that he won't give me anything. It's like that's it. Not that I've asked. It's I respect the boundaries that are now set. So
yeah,
if someone works for a team, I don't usually, people sometimes get it mistaken where they think if you're going to get a sort, you're talking to a team about what they're going to do. But usually the last thing a team wants to talk about is what they're doing. But they want to gossip about what someone else is doing.
Right.
You know what I mean? So if you take the gossip from this team about another team, and then you talk to someone else, and then you talk to someone else, and you start to triangulate what they're all saying similar things, but they're not. And then you look at the numbers where I can maybe have an advantage, where I can know what it actually is reasonably possible. Someone hit me the other day. They're like, what was it? Colin Sexton can't be traded till December. So if someone asked me hey, I think the Suns are going to do this, that, and the other thing. I'm like, well, actually that's not legal. You can't do that with Sexton. So there's a lot of bad information that comes too. I have to filter with my experience, but I don't just, there's a lot of information out there, and whittling it down into something cohesive is doable. But it does involve a certain amount of gossip, which is also why I don't want to be the person constantly spamming, oh, this is going to happen, or this is being discussed. Because then now that changes the gossip, because now people know if I share this with you, you're going to be writing on it. So then it changes their motivation on why they're giving you that conversation.
Right. Yeah. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
What's the common denominator between all that you mentioned? Chanel, you mentioned Makar, you mentioned Buddy. There's been a bunch of people who've come through our program that have ended up with jobs. Can you give us some of the common denominators as far as their work ethic goes, whatever it might be?
There's a lot of great students who have great work ethics and great personalities who need to be in positions that haven't gotten them yet. So
Sure.
I don't want to differentiate too much, other than to say I mean, they all geek out by this stuff. They love this stuff. They want to live and breathe this stuff. I worked a little more with Makar, and he came in already knowing his stuff. So for like, there's different levels of tutoring, and with some it's just like, okay, you already know it. Let's just round out your edges. Whereas some people you're starting. I've done some agents who were like square one. Like I had one agent who was a football agent, and still a football agent, and wanted to be certified for basketball, and had any experience whatsoever other than knowing it was a soft cap, but had no idea. And so we started at the beginning. So with Makar, it was just like he already knew his stuff. Just needed to, rough out some of the edges. Buddy, I didn't work with as directly, but he worked with the players union. We worked together on a few projects. He did a few things for me with like analytics and stuff. And it's just, some of it is follow through. But I have a lot of great people I work with still, who are great former students who are great at follow through, sharp, know their stuff, have a great sense of value of like when we discuss stuff. Mm-hmm. When you argue over a point, it's a respectful argument about like, actual basketball disagreement or value disagreement versus just being a troll or whatever, or just being ridiculous. So I don't know if there's something in particular other than, they're definitely committed to it. And some of it's luck, but some of it's earned. Chanel's pivoted. She became an agent. She was a practicing attorney before she ever got to us. So we're already talking about somebody who's a formidable
human
person.
Being.
Right?
Yeah.
And what's funny is Chanel has been our agent in our mock deadlines for the last 2 years. And she's maybe the most gentle, sweet person you ever met until you start negotiating with her. And then it's like, oh man, she's so much fun because, for me, I want to make sure that, Chanel, who is sweet, isn't taken advantage of, or her voice is overlooked, because like my voice in her ear is, don't let a bunch of, a male dominated society or sport or whatever in any way your voice is way valid, and mm-hmm. you're sharp, and your stuff. So you're going to be competing with people who don't know as much as you do, don't understand as much as you do, but are just louder and assume because of gender or whatever that your take isn't as interesting or whatever. And it's just complete garbage. So I want to make, that's a point of stress I've had with her. And she's great. But she watching her negotiate has been, it's hysterical. She destroyed so many students. I sat next to her in our last one, and I was just, what was it? Like, someone was talking about LeBron. Yeah, the Lakers wanted to extend LeBron, and like her first question is like, what are your thoughts on Bronny? She was already going right there. Like, all right, are you going to make sure you draft my kid? How are we going to get how are we going to get Bronny to, not that she was being LeBron, but as his representation. I guess she was being Rich Paul on that. But like, she got right to the heart of like the issue. Yeah, like in a couple of years, Bronny's coming in. Where's LeBron going to go in relation to that? So anyway, I've lost track of the question, but
I can see just from you talking about Makar and Chanel that you get a lot of joy out of mentoring kids, and I want to commend you for that, because I know you put in a lot of work. You were at USC last night speaking to students. You're here on the Sports Business Classroom podcast. You're a mentor to many. You are constantly doing courses, giving people advice like that. I do want to acknowledge you for that, because that is really fantastic. And the fact that you are an expert at a level that you can speak to not only teams but the league and agents, players, and people who want to work in the league, that's all amazing stuff. And we certainly appreciate you here at Sports Business Classroom.
Appreciate it.
Anything you want to say, or any last pieces of advice? I do want to be mindful of your time.
I mean, generally speaking, I try to say yes. This is something I said last night at the USC thing. It's there's like an improv philosophy of yes and, where someone comes up with an idea when you're improvising, and you agree with them and you take it somewhere else. And then there's also kind of an approach where you say no but, which is you're shutting something down. And there's value to no but in depending on what you do. if you're trying to troubleshoot something that is life or death, and you're trying to find a reason why something is going to fail and cause death, then you better find that no, but this isn't going to work because, right? The world that we're in, is not a, theoretically not a life or death business. I feel like the yes and is better for me, for my career, in not in a selfish way, but I've been more successful saying yes to things that maybe I shouldn't have. As far as I've done a few podcasts or a few interviews where they weren't professional. Every so often you're like, okay, this is terrible, but you muscle through it. But I'd rather do a few of those than you talk to people, you don't know where they're going to end up. And some people end up in positions where they're offering you work down the road because now they're, whatever. But you're also sharing knowledge, and I'd rather be more generous with knowledge and help, rise the tide and lift all the boats if I can. And there is a point where you have to be selfish with things. Bleacher doesn't want me sharing intel and not writing a story. I shouldn't be tweeting about stuff before I write something for Bleacher. So there's a line, but within the lines, I try to say yes. I try to, encourage people. I don't look at people coming up as competition to take what I have. That's hard to do, and a lot of people struggle with that. And certainly, some of the people, I've helped people get jobs that would be great. I would love to have that job.
Sure.
But at the same time, I'm helping someone live their dream, and then also it comes back to me, and now I've got an ally and someone who might walk through a wall for me because I helped them get there. So, it's a tough enough world just waking up, and I had a flat tire the other day, and my wife spilled something on the power strip, and it shorted the whole wall out in the whole bedroom, no power. But that's where our house alarm is. That's where our internet is, and so everything's down, and then we got power back up, but now the power supply is dead on her computer, and now I have to replace that. And it's that's life. There's enough of that where if you can improve things for someone else, it comes back, and it may not feel like it right away, but I've kind of lived that, and I've had success from it. Could I have had more success by being sharkier or, not lifted others up? I'm sure there's a path where I could have been more successful in other ways by being a different human being, but that wasn't my path. So, and then the other aspect is just, goes to the point of writing a story, starting in the middle, if that's where you are. This is the hard part to say. I could say it easily to someone and they're great, but don't be so hard on yourself wherever you are in your journey, because very few people are where they want to be despite what it looks like. Right? Sure. The most put together person is probably pining over something they didn't get or trying to get something else. And so, don't begrudge yourself the struggle. Enjoy the journey, even though, that's not an easy thing to do when you're struggling to make money or struggling to fit in. And I guess the last point is that the networking aspect, that was early on in my career. I didn't know how to do it right away. I had to learn. It's a lot like dating. It's platonically, you have to learn how to build relationships with people, maintain them. They take work. You have to text people just simple things to just keep the thread alive. It was hard during the pandemic because there are a lot of people I have in NBA with teams who are not very text friendly because of their positions. They don't want to, but when I see them, we talk whatever. And those relationships some of them sort of, ran their course, and I have to sort of reinvigorate them. But, relationships are really, there's a lot of nepotism and cronyism. I can't control my last name. There's no Pincus that I know of in the NBA circle. I'm the first that I know of, as opposed to others who have, gotten jobs maybe because of their last name, and some of them are very deserving and some are not. I don't begrudge, it is what it is. It's a nepotism and cronyism business. You can control the cronyism aspect as you grow in the industry, as you get a foothold. And maybe that starts with a bunch of student level, SBC student or whatever students, getting to know the other students so that, when that one person gets an opportunity, maybe they can bring you along, or maybe you can bring them along the way. Maybe it's just an internship. Maybe it's something you don't even know that's going to happen. And so I think those are, be kind to people, help people, say yes, don't be hard on yourself, and have fun, do what you love, and the job doesn't necessarily pay as much as you want right away, and maybe that's okay. There are better things to do with your time if money is the priority. But if your priority is this industry and you love what you do, and doing what you love matters, then this is a way to go that can be very rewarding. But it's rarely rewarding on day one. It might take a few years to get to that point where you're satisfied, and even then you're probably not satisfied of where you are. I reached my goal pretty early on of like getting in the building and being in the locker rooms and talking to guys like Kobe and whatever. So then you set new goals, and then you haven't reached them yet. So now you're not satisfied. So I think that's more or less how I think.
Amen to that.
All right,
Eric, appreciate your time.
Of course.
This was fantastic, and we're definitely gonna have to do a round 2 because I didn't even cover half the questions I had for you.
I can talk.
This was fantastic. Thank you.
Of course.
And there you have it, my friends. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with the brilliant Eric Pincus. You can find the show notes for everything we discussed at sportsbusinessclassroom.com/Eric-Pincus. If you listened and enjoyed the podcast, we'd really love to hear from you. Let us know your thoughts and any follow-up questions you may have by tagging us at Sports Business Classroom on IG and at Eric Pincus on IG and Twitter. Big thank you to our sponsors, Sports Business Classroom On Demand and Hall Pass Media, and thanks again for listening. We will see you here next week on the Sports Business Classroom audio experience.